type of interventions WACA project and program did. One where, for example, like the last ones, so really where we had a very high risk area where we knew that the project needs to intervene exactly there. And here it was more identification of what could be the right option. So there, kind of the project commission technical feasibility study, identifying any type of option from gray infrastructure to green infrastructure with the idea of promoting green infrastructure. But basically all the analytics were kind of similar to any civil work with a lot of numerical modeling, also some physical modeling, and with the idea that there, and also with some estimation of what would be the evolution over several decades, including with climate change. So here it was really kind of detailed analytics, and because there we have kind of really the project could not afford to fail, if I can say. While the second type of interventions are more related, for example, to mangrove or some of the dune restoration where you don't have a lot of assets behind the dunes. And here it was more kind of identification of where would be the most adequate place to implement this nature-based solution. So we knew that, for example, we wanted to plant mangroves and to do some dune restoration to protect the overall ecosystem, but it was a little bit less important the level of protection. And so there was less kind of very detailed analytics, but so it was more kind of ground mission on the ground and identification of appropriate sites. And actually now we are doing, after implementation of the nature-based solution, I would say that's where most of the analytics take place. I will try to be quickly on the implementation barriers. So as often faced during while trying to use nature-based solution, a big challenge has been the dependency on climatic condition. For example, when the project tried to do this biological fixation of dunes in Mauritania, the rainy season came 3 months after what is the norm. So basically, some of the vegetation dried because also of lack of watering. So it's one of the challenge. Also West Africa, so you have some places where even if we try to find what could be an appropriate nature-based solution with vegetation, you have a very strong wave or not enough space actually to leave the nature to expand. So it was limitation to some of the nature-based solution options. Another issue, and I think that's also something we tend to hear when we discuss nature-based solution, is also issue of acceptability by decision maker and beneficiaries for the plantation of mangrove, for example, in Côte d'Ivoire. So some of the people actually exposed to the risk of flooding from the lagoon, they didn't want to have a plantation of mangrove because their excuse was additional mosquitoes, but it was mostly because they didn't want to have their view blocked from the lagoon. So we have that, and also something to mention, and again, specifically in some of the sites, we didn't have a lot of past data, also to understand what has been in a way the condition of the ecosystem before the project. And on that, we did kind of also a study in parallel on assessing all the different coastal protection options in West Africa. And one of the conclusions is on the academic literature. For West Africa, there were only kind of maybe 2 articles dealing with nature-based solution, while the more traditional civil engineering had far more. So it means it really kind of reflects the difficulty to capitalize and to have a nature-based solution in a way more study in more systematic way. And the last one is one of the implementation barriers, which in some cases forced us to go more towards the gray infrastructure, was time which would be needed for the nature to provide the adequate level of protection. So sometimes it needs 10 years for, I don't know, mangroves or kind of sand nourishment to really kind of be redistributed. So it was one of the issues. But one of what have been some strong benefits of nature-based solution. So there have been really a strong implication of communities on nature-based. So, and through this nature-based solution, it trickle down to all the activities of the project. They are being involved both in kind of really the plantation and also in the maintenance. Also, it reduced some of the costs. For the example of Côte d'Ivoire I presented, so thanks to the using the effect of the nature, we could have reduced the amount of construction materials to be used. So with that, some of the capital costs. In some places also, we can see a reduced needs of maintenance requiring external aids. So most of the maintenance could be done by local people. And also we use local materials. So it also reduces some of the costs. It also allow an easier maintenance system. And what would be some of the lessons learned for the other World Bank project? It's just to mention that also nature-based solution takes, I would say, at least as much time as a more traditional project, because we need also to have all this time of convincing some of the decision maker about the actual effectiveness of the solution. So we need to go through all this numerical modeling and all that. We need also to accept to leave some time for the nature to do its work. So in Mauritania, I mentioned to you that kind of when we didn't have rains, the vegetation didn't grow, but when we came there 2 years after, basically we saw that the nature had actually started to grow. So it just kind of, it remained dormant for a certain period of time. But after 2 years, if we had made the evaluation of the project just 6 months after, it would have been a failure, but now we can see that it's working. So that's something also to factor into how we report our progress in our project. Using a decentralized unit and structure is also key to ensure ownership, but also longer term maintenance. We definitely need to share knowledge and experience between countries and between regions. So recently, people in Senegal went to Togo and in Benin to share also their experience of under WACA, and they learned quite a lot, specifically in using some of the species of mangrove Avicennia, for which they had limited success in Senegal. But after, we need also to recognize that there is no kind of unique solution. Sometimes some experts come with some ideas from other countries and they try to implement, and it doesn't work. But I would say that's like for any of the solution. And my last point is we need to learn also from our success, from what we did and what we are doing. Most of the cases, we tend to try to understand why it didn't work, but maybe we don't capitalize enough on what is working and why it's working. In Senegal, for example, we had some higher than expected success rates, and the client had some issue to explain to us why it was working so well. And so if we want to kind of to capitalize on that, it's important also to acknowledge when it fails, but also to try to understand better even when it's working really well. So thanks a lot for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicolas. Very interesting. And I also liked hearing a bit on the community engagement side, which is an important point. And just to note that the GFDRR NBS team recently put out a note on more inclusive approaches to NBS, including in coastal areas. So I think that resonates quite a bit, as well as the need to share lessons, which we're trying to do today. So thank you for sharing your good practices and lessons. And now I'd like to hand it over to Artessa to give us a bit of flavor from the Pacific. If you can figure out how to share your screen.
My screen.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay.
We might have to do something on this white thing. Oh, no. There it is.
Is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
Can you guys see online? Nicolas, can you see?
We do.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, great. Well, good morning, everyone. And thanks to Nicolas for going first. This makes my job much easier. But I think I just wanted to maybe start on the backside, which is to situate the context and the lessons learned from this project. First of all, this Kiribati adaptation program went from 2002 to 2018. So it was early days. of nature-based solutions of climate adaptation. And I came on, I swear I wasn't there since 2002. I came on from 2015 to 2018, and then we went on to prepare another resilience project after that, which is now under implementation. So it's been a long, long relationship with this very, very interesting and unusual country. And so I'm going to take us through what they call their long-term coastal security strategy, simply because from looking at that photograph, the entire place is coastal, one. And second, coastal security is national security for them. So I think that's the first lesson to take away from the, which is a bit of a tangent from NBS, but how important it can really be to have a considered strategy about this in countries like this in particular. The second lesson learned, okay. The second lesson learned for me, which is very similar to what Nicolas said, is that it's very important to be very clear about the level of protection that can be achieved with nature-based solutions, and to be very clear about communicating the level of residual risk to the communities, and to then use that as an impetus to engage the communities to keep maintaining these interventions. Because really, in a country whose exclusive economic zone is as large as the continental United States, has 33 islands, spans the international dateline and the equator, central government isn't going to be getting out there planting or doing research about the sustainability of mangroves and so forth. They try valiantly, but it's really quite a challenge. And so this is just a snapshot of the third phase of the project. And as you can see, while the project had two interwoven objectives, coastal protection and basically water security on these atoll islands, almost everything is related to how to leverage the community structures, which are very, very strong in such a dispersed country. And actually the local government structures are surprisingly strong thanks to British colonization. The local government structures are actually very strong. So how to really leverage those quote unquote island councils and to engage communities in both protecting water supply, but also coastal protection. And the reason these two things are extremely tied is obviously for islands that are maximum 2 to 3 meters above sea level, you get coastal inundation, you get storm surge, your limited groundwater supply suddenly gets completely salinized. And so then your water security is also out the window. The third lesson, which I'm sorry I veered away from, is that you have some extremely urbanized atolls. And, you know, one of those crazy statistics that they throw out there is that the westernmost lower tip of this atoll is more dense than Hong Kong. Now, we know how crazy these density statistics are, but it's pretty dense. So you have development pressures that are highly, highly urban, if you will. And then you have the outer islands that are, you know, completely rural, and the development pressures are different. The impact of human activity is different. And so you need to treat those two different contexts quite differently in the deployment of, in particular, nature-based solutions. So just to give a little bit of a flavor, lagoon side is the gorgeous turquoise water that you think about in the Maldives, and ocean side is the rough side, right? So the bit outside, the nice little lagoon. And so you have different impacts, you have different hazards that the lagoon side and the ocean side are exposed to. So first thing typically is lagoon side is where you would most typically be deploying some of the more maintenance heavy, more nature-based interventions. Ocean side, if you've got any asset worth protecting, sorry to say this, don't even bother. You'll need some pretty good protection for your fixed infrastructure on the ocean side. So you will hear people say that Kiribati isn't drowning. In fact, they're growing. Yes, atoll islands are in general highly stable, but there are areas of very dynamic change. So spits and ends and next to channels. And so the question then becomes, it's not just about, the growth of the island or the availability of space, but it's how do you build fixed infrastructure in such a dynamic environment? I mean, the gross area is not the only parameter to think about. But as I said, it's local human impacts and development pressures that are causing virtually all coastal erosion problems, at least in this setting. So the approach that one of the biggest lessons learned is that you need to really treat the urbanized islands differently from the outer islands. And so then, of course, uncertainty about sea level rise, so on and so forth. But sea level rise, the impact of sea level rise is actually that the high tides, which if you can imagine an island that's 2 meters above sea level, for every 10 centimeters rise in mean sea level, the high tides are going to increase by a significant amount. So you'll get a lot of coastal flooding. And of course, and this is a hard lesson that we learned from 2002 to 2018, reactive approaches by building seawalls where you see active coastal erosion. I mean, this is not going to be news to anyone probably attending this BBL. It's very maladaptive. And as the government working under this Kiribati adaptation program started realizing that they needed a more strategic approach, this is how we were able to support them with what they called their long-term coastal security strategy. So this is probably a very common experience for anybody who works on coastal protection projects. But really, it does demonstrate the maladaptation. It does demonstrate that every time an individual family builds a seawall to protect their property, it often causes community tension, social tension, because the neighbor next door will get more erosion because of the seawall that they built. So there's actually a village in Kiribati where, on an outer island again, on a very rural island, that has banned all seawall construction. And it's a community covenant that nobody builds a seawall in their village. So, again, nothing new about the limitations of seawalls. So I'll just go very quickly through this. So the long-term coastal security strategy of the country, and these may look a little bit like, well, how are these nature-based solutions, right? But it really is that interplay of what they call coastal security rather than just coastal protection. The whole country is coastal, so there you go. So strategy 1, by 2050, significant areas of new safe land created. And that picture that you see is a rendering, but it actually is a naturally accreting area in the elbow of that atoll that I showed you in the first picture. So interesting story. These atolls are actually like a necklace of islets, but during World War II, because Kiribati had such a high geopolitical importance, both the Japanese and the Americans built causeways connecting each of the little islets, which meant intertidal flow was cut off, which means now instead of tides coming in and out, refreshing the lagoon, bringing in sediment, taking out the things in the lagoon, which we won't discuss, now there's natural accretion happening in that little elbow. And so you wouldn't even have to reclaim that land. You would just have to raise it and consolidate it. And you could accept population growth. You could do a well-planned human settlement. And then, of course, you could elevate it. So this is one of their strategies. As you can imagine, this will cost a lot of money. So as much as this would have been my dream project, I never was able to make it happen. But actually the New Zealand government is helping them. They've done a full environmental and social impact assessment on this and have found that it's yes, expensive, but how much is a country worth saving, which is something I heard a lot in the Pacific. So it's an existential threat to them. Second, raising land levels. So another interesting little tidbit, the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, which is very, very, how shall we say, popular in the Pacific. Every time they build a new facility, school, church, dorm, everything is elevated. So you'll see different properties and you'll be like, ah, LDS. And so this is actually, of course, working with the existing natural protections. So elevating to the level of vegetated berms, for example. And so this is, again, what I consider to be a form of a nature-based solution, maybe not formally defined that way, but yeah. And then, of course, retreat. And what does retreat mean in an island that's 300 meters wide? Not that easy, but at least the idea that the preservation of shoreline vegetation is an important resource. And again, in the outer islands, identifying safer places where community and custom land arrangements might allow people to move even within a parcel of land. So parcels of land, as you can see, the two red lines are lagoon side to ocean side. So if your family or your clan are the custom owners of that strip of land, how can communities be engaged to sort of at least retreat or move into that one strip rather than being on the lagoon side or the ocean side? And this is obviously much more possible in the much less dense outer islands. Strategy for just recognizing the importances of beaches and berms and what the existing natural protections are. And so to the activities that were actually supported under the IPF itself, aside from the development of this long-term coastal security strategy, which ironically came at the end, based on lessons learned. So this was, again, 2002 to 2012. So these were early days of trying to understand this. And even in a Pacific country, with islands spread so far apart, some islands, some communities didn't even know what mangroves were. They didn't know why they would work, so there was a lot of, and they didn't, naturally grow there, or at least not the typical ones that would be used. So the Environment Department really had to do a lot of awareness raising, a lot of school outreach, understanding baseline data. And that's a challenge to this day. I was back there in July this year and, we were saying, so how's it going? And they're like, well, it's really hard to know how it's going because of the logistics of it and the different reactions of the plantings in these vastly different climatological regimes. But then also coastal revegetation, which is tied to agriculture and livelihoods, and again, maintaining the quality of the fresh groundwater, which is very, very limited. So here's one of the actually local interventions, not too different from what we saw from Nicola, but it's basically sediment trapping, building up the beach and building up the dunes, and it really involves the community, and it's really important to continue involving the community and to make it almost like an ownership. And in Kiribati, they have coastal management plans that mostly or used to be around coastal fisheries and maintaining fish resources. But now, actually, the community-based mangrove management plans have been integrated into those coastal management plans. So from that perspective, that's been a success. Sorry. So basically, one lesson learned was you can't just plant mangroves everywhere and expect them to work even in the more rural outer islands. There are a lot of different interventions that we frankly were not able to investigate and deploy as much as we wanted them to, much as we may have wanted to. This is from work that we actually did in the Marshall Islands. So again, identifying the conditions under which certain types of nature-based solutions would be effective, perhaps in combination with more engineered interventions. So not necessarily, sorry, the text is very small, but not necessarily limiting ourselves to the typical interventions that we're used to. So this work in the Marshall Islands, we actually identified on the two main islands, two most populated islands, we actually identified throughout the entire two most populated islands where these interventions would be best deployed and in combination with which types of engineered interventions. But that's for another day. So yeah, different types of interventions, recognition of the need perhaps to have hybrid approaches. In South Tarawa, the capital of Kiribati, we tried a hybrid revetment, berm rehabilitation, and ended up finding out that it wouldn't provide the level of protection to the infrastructure assets that was needed. So not always a winning solution. Strategy 5, I like to call this, where we build is almost as important or perhaps more important than what we build. But again, this is part of a general strategy that the government of Kiribati is pursuing. And finally, yes, sometimes you do need the big rocks. And these big rocks don't exist in Kiribati. They had to be brought in from Vietnam, if I remember correctly. So this is protecting the airport to the left. So of course, when the level of risk and when the asset value requires it, then sometimes this is what's needed. But there's a little seawall to the right under the road sign. We did do some hybrid sort of berm rehabilitation, revegetation together with a small seawall to reduce overtopping onto the main causeway. So I think I will stop here because it encapsulates the strategic thinking of the government about this and the kind of, I guess, aspiration to default or try to start with deploying natural coastal defenses, but then to recognize and make wise decisions about where structural responses are needed, and then to really communicate well the level of residual risk to the communities. So I think that was my last slide. Thank you.
No, great. Thank you, Artessa. So it was super interesting. It's a very different case, no? It's sort of live or die. Yeah. Urgent action needed in the face, especially of climate change, sea level rise, and how nature-based solutions are being incorporated into that national security strategy, which is very different, I think, than some of the NBS work that we've seen in other places. But okay, guys, so there are questions online. Boris kindly gave me his laptop so I can actually see. And I know there's been quite a bit of chatter, but maybe we'll go back, maybe Nicholas, to you to kind of answer so people here in the room also can hear some of the questions. But first, we'll go to the discussants, because then more questions may come in. And of course, in the room, if you guys have questions, welcome to ask. So why don't we head to Maputo and hear from Javier. Do you want to come in and give us some reflections from the presentations you've heard?
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues, depending on where you are. Thank you for the invite to join this conversation. I don't know if you can hear me clearly.
Yeah, perfectly.
Yep.
Oh, Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, for me, it's a pleasure to be here because I have Brandon, who has been a team member yeah, in Mozambique and part of this of the work that I'm going to talk about. Um, First, I'd like to congratulate my colleagues for the presentations because they basically shared good examples of what we have been doing in Mozambique. Basically, is a similar work. Just to say that what I'm going to present, I'll be bringing examples from the seat of Beta. Seat of Beta in Mozambique is Beta is the basically we used to say that it's the second largest city in Mozambique because of history reasons, but is number one in terms of exposure and vulnerability to climate change. So every year is affected by one or two cyclones. Every year is faced by with the flooding. Yeah, so and basically you have to evacuate people, you have to create relocation sites and everything. So it's a challenging environment. So and one of the things that this city has been the pilot in Mozambique with the World Bank support for building resilience under the Cities and Climate Change initiative from the bank in 2012. And using the terminology that was used by was brought here by Nicholas on maladaptation. So one of the things that is important here for this city is that everyone knows the risk of the city and everyone is aware that you need to bring multi interventions to protect the city. So you have to deal with coastal flooding, but you also have to deal with excessive rainfall in the city. And you have to work in combination. So this is the first element that is important to bring to this conversation. This is one. The second element of this is that you need to bring different kind of interventions. You have to bring blue infrastructure. You have to combine blue infrastructure with green infrastructure and then gray infrastructure. We're saying that for this city, for instance, for the first interventions for the pilot that was conducted between 2012 and 2021, there was, for instance, the rehabilitation of the riverbeds and the construction of new retention basins. This was a pilot. There was a revegetation of mangroves and the construction of a green park, which was something new and innovative. And then the rehabilitation of drainage canals equipped with an outlet to control the income of waters from the ocean, but also the flash of water or excess of water from the city to the ocean. This has worked perfectly so far. All the interventions that were designed were completed between 2018 and 2021. There were three cyclones between 2019 and 2021. There were three cyclones actually. And the systems, all the systems, the green infrastructure worked well. The drainage system worked well, and the mangroves remain there and they are growing day by day. But what worked well here, just to share an example, is that and as was mentioned by Nicholas and Artesa, is that public acceptance of the initiatives that were prepared was really important. For instance, in the beginning, there was challenges with the local businesses because they didn't want to be relocated. But the public awareness campaigns helped to change their views and accept and wait to see the benefits of having these initiatives. The other element was important for this city. Per estimates is that at least $1 billion should be invested to bring the city to resilient standards. And the pilot invested almost 100 million. And that was and based on the outcome from that investment, World Bank and Invest International and KfW now are putting an investment of $120 million for phase two, and exactly based on the lessons learned from phase one. And the idea here is that working together in coordination, joining efforts that can yield results. And the third element of this and the lesson that came from this first phase is sustainability. So basically, the city has a city council, is a municipality, has local government, but basically they generate 20 to 30% of revenues to run the city. Basically, bringing these big investments, the sustainability or the management of those investments, it becomes a challenge. So it's based on the first phase, it was not that it's important to bring a model that helps the city to generate revenues so that they can use those revenues to run, to maintain, or to operate the system. But also it's important to create capacity, to build capacity. It can be in a kind of a PPP, a public and private partnership, or to create municipal companies to run the investments. Fortunately, the city, for instance, for the Green Park, there was a new company that was created in 2018 that is completely run by the municipality, and there was already a municipal firm that was managing drainage and solid waste management. So those are the entities that have been established and have been strengthened. And the lesson learned is that you need enough sound capacity to run those investments. Managing green infrastructure, or operating, for instance, drainage systems that have outlets that you need to manage based on weather forecasts is a complex endeavor. So you need to train people, and you need to have good equipment. You have to have softwares. You have to have, for instance, people early warning systems that are operated to inform all the operations. So this is what we're doing in phase 2. That at this moment, for instance, we are government's at the contracting stage for a 6 million investment on drainage rehabilitation, and is finalizing the designs for the rehabilitation of coastal protection. Basically, we're talking about an investment of 6 million. And for the coastal protection, the news here is that for the coastal protection investment, what government here is doing is exactly to use the example that is coming from Atessa in Kiribati, which is to combine the green infrastructure again. Basically, here we're talking about dunes restoration in one hand, dune nourishment and revegetation and protection of existing dunes. And the idea here is to reduce to the minimal the use of gray infrastructure like seawalls. So seawalls will not, there will be no construction of new seawalls. Only the existing seawalls will be maintained and strengthened. But everything that should be built to protect all the coastal state of 21 kilometers should be based on nature-based solutions. Basically, it's vegetation and dunes and mangroves. So this is the approach that has been agreed with the municipality, has been consulted with all stakeholders, and everybody has agreed that this is the solution. Let's try. We know that there will be a big challenge in terms of maintenance, but the municipality will be helped to build capacity. There will be there is a directory that will be trained to deal with maintenance of the coastal protection system. There will be an early warning system that will help the municipality to anticipate what are the expected hazards coming from cyclones or from storm surge, and this will help the municipality to build the readiness to maintain or to do the maintenance after the storms have hit the city. This is in one hand, but in the other hand is that the drainage system that will be expanded will work in combination and has a system with the coastal protection system. So the early warning system will help the operation of the coastal, particularly the outlets, but also the management of the release of water from the city to the ocean. So we believe that these lessons that we learned from the first phase, and now what we're doing will help the city to reduce or to reduce the risk and strengthen its resilience to future events. So this is what I would like to share with you, colleagues, and thank you very much.
No, thank you. It's quite an interesting example. And good that you related it back to some of what we heard from the speakers today. Maybe now, Brendan, if you want to say a quick few words before we go to the Q&A, please.
Yeah, thanks. I had a lot of things noted down, but I see a very lively chat, so I mainly want to give the other people an opportunity to come in. But thanks a lot for the great presentations, and thanks, Xavier, for the additional points and the rich experience. From my side, doing MBS for quite a while now. It's interesting to really have this discussion on implementation, because I think we have a lot of these MBS has been an upcoming topic with a lot of discussion about how to do it, how maybe to do it, how to analyze it. But now to have this discussion on lessons learned, implementation, what can work, what cannot work, and what do governments think, I think is key. So maybe if I pick maybe 2 points from my list here, I think one key point I heard is on the operations and maintenance with different experiences. And Nicola mentioned the lower cost and maintenance of MBS potentially compared to gray infrastructure, which we have documented from other examples as well. But we know it's a simplified story in some examples. So it was very interesting to hear Artessa also coming in on from the Kiribati experience. Coming in with a government unable to maintain a land that's so big that it's impossible to get to your trees after you planted them. So really thinking about how can we implement MBS with relatively feasible maintenance, and how to decide where to do it, how to use communities versus institutional structures. I think it's very interesting, and I would like to take in those lessons and do a bit more on that topic in the next year. I think the other part is really the risk-based kind of choice of interventions and the balance between green and gray. And I think it was very interesting for me to hear about the decision makers who need to balance technically feasible options, risk appetite, and need for robust protection, and then the room for flexibility still in the solutions. Areas with high risk and low space often go towards gray, and areas with a bit more flexibility in terms of time, in terms of space, to create those co-benefits, they bring in the green. And that's something we see in other places. Well, my own country, the Netherlands, would be underwater without gray infrastructure. So we know that just relying on green is of course not possible. And the same is a bit on the time constraints of how do we do these more difficult, more complex, sometimes more time-taking NBS measures in a 4 to 5 year investment project where you already lose a few years to studies and safeguard work. So I think this emphasizing that green and gray need to be combined, and we need to find the robust solution for every location, of every country, of every project, kind of from the start by looking at gray and green in an integrated way from the feasibility stage to design. I think is a very interesting lesson, and good to take up. So let me just stop there and give it back to you, Zoe.
No, great. So maybe we can start now, open up for questions and answers with the speakers. And so there's been quite a bit of chatter online. So maybe we'll start over with Nicolas. So there were some different questions, and one I was thinking the same. One of the questions, so right, when you're at TTL, you're preparing a project, you're working with government, you have a fixed budget, and so you need different experts to bring in. So in this case, what type of experts? It's social, it's what type of mangrove species, you know, and so finding that expertise and how to identify it. So I don't know, Nicola, if you want to come in and start answering, maybe you can share some feedback. You've typed it online, but we in the room can't see it. So maybe if you want to start with a few of those questions, you can run through. And then there's another one that I also have run into when I've discussed with clients, and I won't say who. But so when you talk about MBS and they're like, yes, but I want to pay for pavement because I want to cut ribbons and I want to have inaugurations and I can show an investment that is concrete. And it's much harder to show something that is not. And so that there's some of those types of issues coming up in the chat. So do you want to start with that? And then there's some for Artessa chime in as well if you want to. And there's the question for you on the Caribbean, lessons that are translatable from the Pacific to the Caribbean.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for the questions. The aspect of also bringing the right, I would say, a set of expertise is important. I would say both internally at the bank, but also through the clients. And maybe WACA, I think, on trying to push for, not trying to push, actually kind of just to implement a nature-based solution. WACA is in each of the 9 countries. Actually, it's led by Ministry of Environment. So, and in West Africa, we have a lot of people coming either from forestry or kind of more park management. So I would say we have a more positive kind of condition to discuss about nature-based solution. But nevertheless, kind of we are working with municipalities, with different kind of actors, and usually when also an environmental kind of more someone from environment try to sell nature-based solutions, they will consider, oh, but you want just to do nature conservation. You are far less kind of interested with kind of really what we need, which is the protection. So that's where we need really to have kind of quite strong, I would say more civil engineer or more people who speak really with a strong DRM, so disaster risk management background, both from the World Bank side and actually just WACA. We have a different, I would say even co-TTL ship and different partners. So some co-TTLs are for urban resilience. We have a strong also social development, which goes beyond just safeguards. So on that side, we have also the different aspects internally covered. And yeah, and to the client also, it's really to make sure that we have the right people to be able to convince. To be honest, it's not always easy to find mangrove experts, for example, in the different regions. I saw that also João with a co-TTL, with a country TTL for São Tomé. São Tomé is part of WACA also. I started there and we had some issue to find a national expert on mangrove there, but at the end we managed to bring. So, but yeah, just to say that finding the, for nature-based solution, you need really a wide range of expertise discussed both internally and to the bank. And maybe just another reflection, if I can add from the discussion, either from Artesa and also some of the elements. I think what's important on nature-based solution, it's maintenance, but also really making the awareness both for the community and for the national institutions, the importance of the nature-based solution. Because here, for example, in Senegal, they did a massive reforestation program to actually to protect the coastline and to make sure that nobody's building there. But I think it was 2 decades ago, and now some decision makers are forgetting why these forests have been planted. So they start to really kind of to deforest just to be road, just on the shoreline. And so having kind of the communities also being able kind of to continue to remind also decision maker about basically why they are planted and why they have been part of this implementation of the solution is also important to.
Yeah, so maybe I'll tackle the question about sort of transferability of these lessons to other coastal states or small island states. I think what I learned most importantly was that risk-based approach of understanding what is the level of protection that you need for particular assets, for particular densities of communities, and having a very objective way of assisting the governments to decide what solutions to deploy where. I think that is probably transferable everywhere. As much as we would like to default to or use as much as possible green interventions, sometimes a hybrid is necessary, and that needs an understanding not just of hazard levels, but also an understanding of what is the acceptable level of risk for what you're trying to protect. And so, yes, the other lesson that is probably transferable is a greater willingness and finding the right technical expertise to bring together these hybrid solutions that will work. As I mentioned, we tried in Kiribati and it didn't always work. And that was, 15 years ago, a decade ago. And so we need to stay abreast of the science to really figure out better ways of making these hybrid solutions. And the third, I think, really is that in these maintenance heavy types of interventions that need to really integrate the local government structure, community structures, in this idea that, well, you're protecting and maintaining this not just for coastal protection, but also potentially for livelihood opportunities, agriculture, food security. And going back to those coastal management plans that focused on fisheries, you need to hook it into something that people care about very, very much. And so that was maybe one success that we were able to get to in the end of the program.
I want to open, there's some more questions coming in online, but I want to open it up to the room here. You guys have been patiently listening. So any questions or comments? Deep thoughts?
Hand up.
You can. Yeah, go for it.
So this may not be, this may be beyond the boundaries of the topic, but my assumption coming into this was one of the advantages of nature-based solutions over grey infrastructure for this kind of coastal resilience is that you might be able to mobilize other forms of financing for those, right? Carbon finance, other environmental financing mechanisms. So I don't know in these examples whether that was considered, whether that's still too complicated or it's still kind of something for the future, or but it would just be interesting to hear more because I think that's really going to be the way to drive real momentum on these kind of solutions if there is a financing benefit for countries involved.
Yeah, I can have a go at that. I mean, recall that this was let's say 2010 generously. There was no IDA for the Pacific. It was GFDRR, recipient executed trust funds, GEF, and bilateral funding from the government of Australia. And so while it's not quite as sophisticated as carbon financing and so forth, it was one of the early examples of tapping into climate adaptation financing, and one of the early, I think the first climate adaptation project in the Pacific. So for sure, that's a way to go. I think you're absolutely right.
Was it PPCR?
Not PPCR, good old GFDRR, RETF.
Okay. RETF, okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
I just wanted to contribute that in my previous role in the Middle East, we were building these massive urban developments, island developments in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. We used the tourism prospects as ways to convince the project owners to integrate nature-based solutions. So we did the dune developments. We did the sand engines, we did the mangrove plantations, and they really, they sell the product much better. A 5-star resort behind the dune zone is, it's a selling point not to have any hard infrastructure right in front of your hotel doorstep. So where there was one hotel, for instance, that did have massive erosion problems and the sea was coming into the pool, we looked at geotubes rather than, again, hard breakwaters, and we sank some boats off the coast. So again, maximizing the tourism potential, creating reefs rather than kind of blocking them off with stone and tripods. Or tetrapods. So I think you need to make a business case sometimes for these types of solutions.
Yep.
Maybe one. I think Nicola has an interesting case also on the co-finance.
Please come in.
Yeah, no, it's thank you and thanks for the question. Also, first on WACA, we started also with support from Jeff for some of the nature-based implementation of the nature-based solutions. That's also something we add to the IDA. But also now with the new operation also in Ghana, basically we have some additional financing to support mangrove restoration aligned with a blue carbon approach. The idea is really we will support kind of the restoration and of mangroves, which the idea also to later to generate some potential carbon revenue. And so actually to kind of to continue to be able to do more. So that's something which will be started in Ghana, but it was also quite attractive, both for the government, but also from our side to kind of to combine that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's also a question from Phil. Hi, Phil. Phil's online asking about the use of coral as coastal protection and that it can be somewhat controversial. So I don't know if either of you or any other colleagues want to come in on that. He's working on a program in the Caribbean.
I'm happy to say something about it. I think Artessa also covered it a little bit in a presentation.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, maybe just, I think, no, of course, there's potential to work with coral reefs as a nature-based solution for coastal protection, coastal resilience. Of course, it's kind of the friction effect of corals that can reduce the wave energy, as well as the sort of the water depth basically on the reef that can break the waves. But in addition, of course, there are a lot of other benefits around reefs if they're healthy, you know, like fisheries and recreation, tourism, and just sustaining species. But I think the controversy, maybe if you can think of a controversy, there's a number of controversies. One is that many people would argue like that sometimes there's too much of a priority on restoration rather than the protection of reefs, because they are very sensitive. They're very sensitive to environmental stressors like water quality, overfishing, climate change impact, like water sea surface temperatures. So like some people might argue like small scale restoration, which is very expensive, is a bit of a distraction from trying to protect reefs. That's one thing. And the other thing is indeed like to what extent can it actually be successful conserving reefs, because we know that the oceans will get warmer and that a lot of the reefs will die anyway. So it's still probably feasible in many locations to do some sort of artificial or hybrid interventions on reefs for coastal protection. And there are kind of a lot of studies that show that, but you also have to be honest about like what the reef will look like in such a condition, and that will not be like a perfectly healthy coral reef with all the benefits that you might expect from that. So it's like, I guess the solution will be to tell sort of an honest story about like how you can manage reefs to protect coastlines, and that there is a lot of uncertainty around like, you know, what reefs will look like in 30 or 50 years time. I don't know, Artessa, you know, that.
Yeah, and I think maybe that I'm by no means a coral reef expert, but I think also the difference in the prospect of not outright destroying coral reefs on a massive scale because of wave attenuation versus trying to restore coral reefs for natural, let's say, island regeneration. So those are two very different things, right? And the approaches would be very different. And again, risk communication.
Yeah.
Kiribati is not going to get bigger because we make their coral in any of our lifetimes or 10 lifetimes from now because we strengthen or protect the coral reefs.
Okay, and then there's another one that's just come in. Would anyone have an update on the World Bank's engagement, if any, with natural assets companies? Anyone? Guys? No. No? I don't know, Boris, Brendan, anything on that? Not so much.
Okay.
Nothing structured really, no.
No. Okay. Okay. So I don't know, any other final thoughts, points that anyone wants to come in, last questions? Yeah.
So, hi, I'm coming from a very different perspective. I'm coming from FCI. I just wonder, maybe, and this is like a new question, but I just wonder whether this kind of projects inform the broader policies, like on the land use or the Austrian policy. It's very broad, you know. And also, I also had a question about how much, like, do we have an evidence about impacts on the NBS? Like, so for instance, if the NBS is implemented, how much the risks or impacts on the coastal communities have been done? I mean, can we have that kind of a proof or some kind of evidence that, okay, so since we invested this amount of public money, we were able to reduce this amount of risks and impacts on the coastal communities and the industries there.
Yeah, I'm happy to take part of it. I think part of it's also a bit addressed by Artessa's presentation, but I think on the planning side, a way for us to engage is on these coastal management plans, right? So it's like a sort of looking at coastal areas or coastal areas that are, affected potentially by the ocean, as you define it that way, for example. So, and there can be definitely a strong planning, land use planning component there. So like I think on one of your slides, you saw this kind of idea of working with coastal setbacks or protecting coastal vegetation. So making sure that that it's in the land use plan that you cannot do any permanent construction in the first 50 or 100 meters from the coast or something like that. And these things you can also include in your risk assessment. No? So you can say, okay, what would be the impact on my risk if I, implement such a setback along vulnerable areas on the coast. This would bring me so much less exposed assets, and you can sort of make an estimate of what would be the economic and financial benefits from that. So yeah, I know the bank has worked in several countries in Kiribati, I think, in the Caribbean and several islands, and we also worked on a coastal management plan under GFDRR in Seychelles. So there are several examples of how kind of the coastal management planning tries to inform land use plan.
On the sort of cost benefit, I have to be honest. Like I said, this project closed in 2018. I went back in July. We visited the Ministry of Environment, and they said, yeah, can you give us some money to do long-term studies and research and to actually go out to these islands and see how they're growing and what species were the best. And I don't know if the program has resources to do it. But yeah, it's a tough one, and it needs to be done, and it takes a long time to really understand the benefits and the ways to optimize those benefits, and where will it work, where will it not work. We need to be realistic about that.
Yeah, so we actually just launched a guideline on cost benefit analysis for nature-based solutions this spring. So yeah, if you go to naturebasedsolutions.org, you can have a look, and there are several examples from coastal areas as well, and it can be costly. So yeah, there's different types of cheaper and faster and more expensive approaches depending on where you want to do it in the project cycle. So I think that could be helpful. There's actually a good example from the Mozambique case also that Xavier and also Brendan worked on that they applied there. I don't know if you want to say something about that, Brendan or Xavier. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I can also do it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Well, yes. There have been studies and there have been some factuals on the benefits. For instance, the green park is being used now for many activities, for revenues generation, for instance. Now it's contributing with around 40% of what is needed to maintain all the infrastructure that has been created. This is one example. There has been huge development, business development around the area that benefited from the investment, because now there is security around, so there are no more thefts, there are no more rape events that used to happen, or crime basically. So these are examples that are happening. So the city now is better than before. So, but we need to have more specific studies on the impacts and benefit that you can measure. But things are happening, and the reality is there. Yeah.
I think it's also powerful to have some of these case studies or even storytelling, about it. And as you were saying, Javier, about how you had done the project, made the investment, and then you had cyclones hit.
And you need political reforms in your countries.
Oh my.
席少生喷射而出，显见这位美国哥伦比亚大学教授憋笑憋很久，都怪中国证监会副主席方星海对全球秩序崩解的幽默深度。
Okay.
And-
That's exciting.
So this proves that we are so being listened to.
Yeah. Well, that was exciting. No, but what I was going to say is I think, these types of stories where, yes, we need to do analytics, we need to understand cost benefit, but also when you can say, okay, we did invest, we had a cyclone that hit and the impact, X number of people and the impact or damage and loss compared to when we had a cyclone X many years before was much less. I mean, even those types of stories, I think, can be powerful to sort of explain the value of these types of interventions. Okay, we have one more question to Artessa.
Yeah, maybe on that one, if you allow me.
Oh.
Yes. That is, there is a way of capturing that information. The only challenge that we have is sometimes the size of storms, right? Because sometimes, some people will not agree on the return periods associated with a specific storm. And depending on the preparedness measures that you put in place before, so sometimes the outcome of that assessment will not be can be contentious. But for instance, in the recent events in Beta in 2019 and 2020 and 2021, for instance, there is agreement that the retention basin, the green infrastructure worked perfectly, and they helped to reduce the time, for instance, for release of water from the city to the ocean, but also helped the good operation of the outlet. For instance, it was closed when there was high tide, helping to protect the city from coastal flooding. So the factors are there, but again, the size of the storm sometimes can be a challenge in terms of judgment of the impacts.
No, thank you. Agreed. Artessa, can you talk a little bit about maintenance costs linked to community engagement? So are communities losing, from our experience, from Juliana's experience, communities are losing interest in NBS because their labor is not compensated.
Mhm.
So what did you guys do in Kiribati about that, if anything?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So the Ministry of Environment in Kiribati actually had a mangrove planting program before the project came in and started supporting it. So it was almost let's call it a early stage P4R. And the things that they did ask us to finance were, of course, the cost of the seedlings, the cost of transportation to the outer islands, and the cost of community events with food. So you might not, I mean, this is the Pacific. For anybody who's been to the Pacific, like, you need to make it a party and you need to have food. And you need to make it, like here. So you need to, I think, make it, approach it from that way, but also approach it from this kind of almost community covenant approach, which we spoke about. So no, they're not going to be out there doing it every day like it's their job, but from the community covenant, from the resource management, from the livelihood aspect, those are some of the sort of incentives that you need to maybe find, and tourism would be another one. But yes, I still have, expense reimbursement sheets that I had to say, do not itemize this, please, because it was all food, party rental, music. So there are definitely maybe ways to incentivize it, but it's not free.
Okay, so with that, thank you everyone.
So
yes.
maybe just if I can just complement on that aspect, also on the maintenance cost and how to finance. For us, that's why also we are kind of really eager to see how, a little bit linked with the question before, if we manage to kind of to link that also with some carbon financing and other to bring additional revenues, which can then be used to maybe finance some communities activity on the longer term. That's also for us why it would be important not only to be able to finance restoration, but also to make sure that activities could remain maintained.
Good. No, so I was just saying thank you to our speakers, to our discussants, to you guys all for being online in the room listening. Very interesting discussion, one of many to come, I'm sure. And what I think is fascinating is that in many cases, NBS, so you say NBS, it was like at the beginning stages, but I think in many places it's been happening for a long time. But I think now as part of development work, it's catching on more and more as something that we should be investing in rather than it's just kind of there and you don't really appreciate it or it's gone because it's, you know, because of housing development, infrastructure and other port planning. But so please check out the NBS. So it looks like Boris brought some publications.
This is actually a publication that was led by Juliano, which is here on the environment team. But it's actually a very good example of doing this modeling to enable cost benefit analysis. So it's like basically hydrological modeling and looking at the impacts of flooding and what is kind of the effect of mangroves reducing those impacts. So if you want to take anything that.
And then, of course, the website. So do check it out and stay engaged with the community of practice. And is there anything else upcoming you want to announce in terms of events?
No, I think we'll do another one of these probably either just before the end of the year break or in January, February. So stay tuned.
Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good night. Good day.
Thanks everyone. Thanks a lot.